بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us and given us another opportunity to talk about His book, to learn about His book, to get connected with His book, and to find out the hidden treasures of the Qur'an to some extent that we can. And Alhamdulillah, Qur'an is full of treasures of knowledge. It is a matter of reflection and a matter of pondering on its verses and its teachings to pick up as much as possible. In the last 3 sessions, we have been going through an intro to the Qur'an, an introduction to the Qur'an, what kind of book is, what is unique about Qur'an, what is different in Qur'an compared to other books, human books. And with the introduction that we have provided in the last 3 sessions, hopefully now we have some familiarity with the Qur'an as a unique book. And from this session onwards, we're moving into the sciences of Qur'an. Sciences of Qur'an are developed to understand the Qur'an better. Sciences of Qur'an are meant to help the tafsir. So anybody who does tafsir of Qur'an, they have to have good knowledge of the sciences of Qur'an. And there are many sciences of Qur'an, but one of the main sciences of Qur'an is the translations of Qur'an. Translation of Qur'an itself has become a science that you have to follow certain rules and you have to have certain understanding in order to translate the Qur'an. Qur'an is not like any other book that you just know the language and you sit down and you translate it. The sciences of Qur'an can start with translations of Qur'an, which is the focus of this presentation. And then other sciences after translation is the tafsir. Tafsir itself is a science, the commentary of Qur'an, the explanations of Qur'an. And then there are some other sciences such as division of surahs into Makki surahs and Madani surahs. The surahs that were revealed to Prophet Muhammad ﷺ while he was in Mecca, they are called Makki surahs. And the surahs that were revealed to him during Medina time, called Medina surahs. And each of them have their own focus and distinct features. When you understand the distinction and difference between Madani and Makki surahs, then you can have a better expectation of the contents and the focus of the surahs. Also, there is another science called Muhkamat versus Mutashabihat. The verses of Quran can be divided into 2 categories. Those categories are verses that have a clear meaning and firm meaning, and those verses that could have resembling meanings or more than one meaning, allegorical meanings. And then another science of Quran is Asbab al-Nuzul, the occasions of revelations. That what was the occasion behind this revelation? Certain verses of Quran has an occasion, historical occasions behind it, historical context. Another science of Quran is al-Nasikh wal-Mansukh, that some verses have been superseded by some other verses, sometimes in terms of meaning, in terms of application. So we will look at that science. And then the qira'at, the various readings of Quran. So these are different sciences that we'll cover in the next few sessions. But this presentation is focusing on the translations of Quran. Translations of Quran have a very specific background and history. Initially, there was, when Muslims wanted to translate the Quran, there was a debate among the scholars. Why there was a debate? Because during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the Quran was not translated, as there was no need for translation, because the Prophet ﷺ was an Arab in terms of language and ethnicity, and the people around him, all the recipients of Quran, were Arabs. So there was no need for translations. And later on, when Islam expanded to non-Arab countries, the need for translations of Quran arose. And then the scholars had very important intellectual debate about the translation of Quran. And they had certain concerns about the translations of Quran. The very first concern was, are we allowed to translate the Quran? Because Allah did not tell us anything about translation. The Prophet ﷺ did not translate it during his time. And now, are we allowed to do something like this? It's a valid question to put forward in terms of methodology. The second concern was, is the Quran translatable? You know, the Quran, when you think about it, it's the perfect word of Allah, the perfect word of God of the universe. When God speaks, His word, every sentence that He says, every phrase that He says, is so sophisticated, has so many dimensions and so much meanings. Now, a translator tries to understand that, and the translator may pick up certain parts of that, certain meanings of it, and may not be able to pick up some other parts of it. Some other translator may pick up some other aspects of it. So, can we translate the Quran? Because when you translate a book, usually the translated book is considered as an equivalent of that book. So when we translate the Quran, can we say that, okay, we have an equivalent of Quran here in this language? Can we say that? And the scholars had serious concerns about it, that, you know, Quran is the perfect word of Allah and translations are the imperfect words of human beings. Human beings look at the dictionaries or the common usage of that word, and they come up with some approximate explanations or translation of that meaning. Because the words of Quran are applicable at different times as technology advances, as science advances, as human beings progress in terms of knowledge of the world and everything. So human beings have limitations. At one point, a human being may think that I have the best translation, but maybe 200 years later, some translators will say, this person didn't know anything about this, about that, you know. He did not pick up this aspect or that aspect. So translatability of the Quran was a question. Another major concern for the scholars was the possibility of distortions. That when human beings, you know, try to translate the Quran, they would be, knowingly or unknowingly, sometimes they may distort the Quran. They may distort the meaning. They may just say certain things that could mislead the reader or could not, you know, pick up the correct meaning of the word or the sentence. So there is a valid concern for distortions, because this happened practically in other religious books, in other scriptures. As they were translated, a lot of changes took place as a result of translations. A fourth concern of the scholars was that, you know, now once we make the translations available for non-Arab readers, then they would just depend on that translation and they would not try to learn the original language, and they would not be encouraged to learn the Arabic language. So they would alienate themselves from the original text of Quran, They will just depend on the translations that, okay, I know Quran because I have read the translations. Now, all of these scholars agreed for a genuine need of the translation of Quran. That no doubt, no question that yes, the Quran should be translated. There is a need for it, not only for non-Arab Muslims, but for non-Muslims, because this book is meant to be for all people of the world. So translation is a need. It must be translated, but they put these concerns on the table so that they have an intellectual discussion about it, and they come up with a proper conclusion and methods so that they can safeguard the risks and say they can protect the Quran from any issues and problems at the human level, as it happened in other religious books, scriptures. After a lot of debates and discussions, the scholars concluded that let's make a compromise. Because some of them were saying, let's just translate. And some of them said, no, wait a minute, we will translate, but let us talk about certain things. And then say, okay, let's have a compromise solution. What is the compromise solution? They said, tafsir of Quran is already a science. Tafsir, explanation of Quran, was already a science among the scholars of Islam. Why? Because tafsir started with the Prophet ﷺ himself. Sometimes people would go to the Prophet and say, oh Prophet, what does this verse mean? Why this verse says this or this other verse says this? And the Prophet will explain. So those explanations became the tafsir of Quran, and they started the science of tafsir. And later on, companions of the Prophet followed that, and they became mufassirin of Quran, explainers of Quran, commentators of Quran. So tafsir was already a science. And the scholar said, okay, let us agree on this, that when we translate, we're basically translating the tafsir of Quran. We're not translating the Quran itself, but the tafsir of Quran. Meaning that the reader of Quran, the translator of the Quran, when they read the Quran, they get an understanding from the Quran, and then they will translate that understanding into another language. Not translating all the details of the tafsir, of the commentary, but since the meaning of Quran comes through tafsir, so that meaning that comes from tafsir, it has to be translated in another language. And they said, yeah, fine. So then we have to call it translation of the meaning of Quran, not translation of Quran. Because depending on the meaning that the translator gets, he is the one who translates it. So that's why many initial translations of Quran were called translation of the meaning of Quran. That the meaning that the translator gets, then the translator translates that. It is not the translation of the Quran itself. So there's a subtle difference. However, that does not, that should not discourage the readers of translations, and that should not discourage people that, okay, translations of Quran has no value and I should not read translations. No. Translations of Quran, as long as it is done through a genuine effort and through a faithful and objective method, then it is good. It's good to start understanding the Quran, to start getting the message of Quran. It is good enough. However, to become an expert of Quran, to become very knowledgeable about the Quran, you can't say, I know the Quran, if you don't know the Arabic language, if you don't know the language of the Quran. To become a teacher of Quran, to become a scholar of Quran, you must know the language, because of a lot of things that are in the language. So it was decided to call the translation of Quran the translation of Quran. Don't call it Quran. Quran is used only for the Arabic text, not for the translation. When you read the translation, say explicitly, I read the translation of Quran. Now, let us better understand some of the limitations of translations and issues. Yes?
What about the literal translation of the word?
So there are different methods of translation. One of them is literal translation. Literal translation picks up the words in a literal way, which sounds very odd because every language has its own grammatical structure. So when you translate literally, you don't follow the rules of grammar and the rules of syntax of the target language. You just go with Quran, and the sentences will not sound very appropriate in another language. But they are trying to keep the meaning intact, but still they are not picking up all the meanings. So it still has limitations. So let's look at some of the different limitations and issues. I'm now moving to slide 4. First, there is a conceptual limitation of the translation. The conceptual issue is the word of Allah versus word of human beings. When human beings try to translate the Quran, the miraculous wording of the Quran would not stay the same. The miraculous nature of the Quran will be affected because every word of Quran, every sentence of Quran is the word of Allah, which is full of miracles. Miracles in terms of meaning and in many ways. So that miraculous nature can be lost. The perfection of the wording, the phrases, the sentences, the beauty of the language. When you know Arabic and when you start reading Quran, you just want to continue and you don't want to stop. But when you read the translations, you may or may not get that beauty and that feeling in terms of power of the language and the wording and the eloquence. Also, human beings, depending on their knowledge and their backgrounds, they may have certain limitations. Depending on sometimes political environment, sometimes depending on other aspects of environment, a translator can be influenced by that. So the translator would try to translate the words based on certain aspects of the society. Like, for example, certain words of Quran which has multiple meanings. That meaning is selected by the translator that he thinks that this is very popular today, or people will accept it. For example, the word jihad. Now if a translator of Quran in American society or European society these days wants to translate the word jihad, they will not cover the other aspects of jihad. They will just cover the literal meaning of jihad, and they will because of the environment and the culture and the society. So similarly, other aspects of political environment can affect the meaning. While jihad is at the best thing if you understand it in full meaning, but sometimes the full meaning is not captured. And the scholars sometimes are affected by their own limitations. Some translators of Quran, they translate the Quran that they don't have much knowledge of Islam to start with. They just think that, okay, I can translate the Quran based on this knowledge or that knowledge. And a lot of times they depend on dictionaries and they just go and get the words from the dictionaries. The second issue of translations is the linguistic aspect beyond the conceptual, because of the special, unique things in Arabic language. Arabic language is proved to be a very rich language. In many areas of life, there are so many different words and vocabulary that other languages do not have that many. And the meanings are sometimes so much related with each other. The words are all related, the verb and the noun and the subject and the object and the different aspects of grammar that you see, all the words are connected with each other. And there are a lot of subtleties in the language that can be missed in translation. The eloquence of the language is definitely missed in translation because the eloquence of the Arabic cannot be picked up by the meaning in the translation. Also, a word can have multiple meanings, and the translator may not pick up all the meanings, may pick up just one or two meanings. And let's look at some examples to get an idea about these issues. The first example is a verse towards the end of Surah Al-Baqarah, the second surah of Qur'an, or the second chapter of the Qur'an, that a lot of times you may have heard this verse being recited in the Khatim of Qur'an, Dua of Khatim, that this verse is very commonly recited. The verse is, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. That Allah does not charge anyone basically beyond their capacity, or except what is within the capacity of the person. لها ما كسبت وعليها ما اكتسبت. لها ما كسبت, for anyone, they will have the consequences of what they will do, what good it means that they have gained. And it will also bear the consequence of what wrong things, bad things they have done, that the nafs has done. So look at the words that I have highlighted in red color in slide number 5. Kasabat, maktasabat. So in English, we just translated that whoever has earned good deeds or bad deeds. But that there's a fine letter, there's a letter ta, the T, that come in the middle in Arabic. And that affects the meaning. So kasaba versus iktasaba. Kasaba means earned. Iktasaba means earned with much more efforts. So when you do good deeds, you can earn it easier, in an easier way compared to doing a bad deed. For a bad deed, in order to do a bad deed, you have to go beyond yourself. You have to, go against your nature, because your nature also doesn't like doing wrong thing if the nature is pure. If a person has grown up with pure nature, and the nature is not corrupted and is not polluted, then the person is pure, and the pure nature likes honesty. And when a good person with pure nature, when a person lies, they will feel uncomfortable. They will feel restless, and I lied. Their heart will be restless. Their soul will be restless. And now they have to think about, how can I cover my lie? How can I, make sure that people don't know that lie? How can I say it in a way that can be acceptable by people, and they will believe me and they will trust me? So you have to make lots of efforts to lie. While if you just want to be honest, you just say it right away without any thinking, because that's the reality and that's what you really went through, or that's what happened exactly. So you don't need to think about any other thing, you just say it, right? And subhanallah, this is really important concept, that basically Allah says that getting reward is much easier than getting sin. Why? Because reward comes through your, if you have pure nature, whatever you do in general, it will be on the right path. If you understand Islam, Islam is according to the human nature. The teachings of Islam in general goes with the human nature. And you will be, comfortable without any restlessness. But when you want to do some sin, you have to really work harder. That's why the good thoughts that come to us, you make some good intention and some good thoughts you have about somebody or something, you get reward right away in Islam. But when you have bad thoughts, until and unless you have not acted upon it, you're not getting a sin. When you have some bad thoughts, bad intentions, and until you have not acted upon that, the Prophet ﷺ says, you will not get a sin. So you have to do it. You have to put more efforts to do it to get a sin. But for good thoughts, just having the thought, you get a reward for it. As long as that thought is really meant to act upon. Good deeds are possible only because of support of Allah. We can't do any good deed without the help and support of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But bad deeds, you do it yourself. Allah does not support you. Allah doesn't prevent you either. So Allah has given you a permission of freedom of will, but He will not stop you from doing bad deeds. But you do it. And good deed only through Allah. And this verse of Qur'an in Surah Nisa, verse 79, that Allah says, وَمَا أَصَابَكَ مِنْ حَسَنَةٍ فَمِنَ اللَّهِ. Whatever good that happens to you, it is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَا أَصَابَكَ مِنْ سَيِّئَةٍ فَمِنْ نَفْسِكَ. And whatever bad that happens to you, it is from yourself. Bad in the real meaning of bad, not something that it looks bad, sounds bad, but it's not bad. Sometimes bad things that happen, we interpret it as bad, but actually that's a good thing for us. If it's from Allah, it's always good for us, even though it sounds or looks bad. But if it is from Allah, it's definitely good. And if it's from ourselves, it could be bad or good. So that also is confirmed here in this understanding. So you can see that there are so many different aspects of that translation of kasaba and iktasaba. And in English, we just say whatever you earned, good deeds or bad deeds. We just use the word earned, right? But that letter, small letter ta, that makes, gives those additional meanings that the translators usually do not pick up of that subtle differences of the language, of the, grammatical aspects. Okay, is it clear? Is this example clear to everybody? All right, another example. In Surah Al-Dahr or Surah Al-Insan, Surah number 76, verse number 3 says, Inna hadaynahu sabila imma shakiran wa imma kafura. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the verse before it, talks about creation of human beings and then says, we have indeed guided human beings, we have shown them the path, we have guided them to the path of righteousness, the path of the straight path, the path of Allah, whether he will be grateful or ungrateful. So everybody has some level of guidance from Allah through their nature, through prophets, through messengers, whether they reject it or they or become grateful to Allah, it's their choice. Yes.
The second word "we" was capitalized. Is that a translation? What does "we" mean? Who's "we"?
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking. We covered this in the earlier slide presentations that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whenever He speaks about His powers, His majesty, His capabilities, His authority, He speaks with plural pronoun and say we. It's a royal language, when kings speak, they use that kind of. Whenever He speaks about His forgiveness, His mercy, His one-to-one relationship, He says I. Now here, the two Arabic words that I have put in red color, shakir and kafur. In Arabic language, in the grammar there is something called awzan, or a plural of wazn. Awzan can be translated as roots and structures of the words. And usually, when Allah uses two words, they use the same wazn, the same kind of structure. So if Allah uses shakir, then Allah will use kafir. If Allah uses shakur, then Allah will use kafur. See, they sound arithmetic. So here, when you see shakir versus kafur, why Allah did not use kafir here, that Allah used kafur? Or why Allah did not use shakur instead of shakir? In translation, we just say either one, shakur or shakir, we just say grateful. Or kafur or kafir, we just say ungrateful. It's one of the meaning of kafir. But if you think about it a little deeply and you think about the Arabic language and the grammar, then you realize that, there are some subtle differences here and there is more into the meaning, more depth. The wazn of fa'ul, that the verbs or use the subjects, the nouns, it indicates a more forcible and a more effectful state compared to fa'il. Like fa'il means someone who does it, but fa'ul means someone who does it with much more, push and power and force. Okay? So shakir means grateful, but shakur means extremely grateful. Kafir means ungrateful or disbeliever. Kafur means a very serious disbeliever, a very serious person with ingratitude. So why Allah here did not use the same structures and Allah used shakir versus kafir? Because shakir means grateful, and human beings can be grateful, but to be extremely grateful, it takes a lot of additional kind of power and force and efforts. And a lot of people are shakir, but very few people are shakur. Allah says, وَقَلِيلٌ مِّنْ عِبَادِيَ الشَّكُورِ. Very few of my servants are shakur. Shakur is like that you are in the state of gratitude all the time. And everything you say.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Hayya ala salah. Hayya ala salah. لا إله إلا الله
لا إله إلا الله اللهم رب هذا الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة. So going back to the example on slide 6, that Allah used an unusual kind of parallel here for the awzan of two words, but there is a intended difference behind them. That basically Allah says that human beings can be, can be easily extremely ungrateful, but they cannot become extremely grateful. A lot of people, very soon they can become ungrateful and very ungrateful, extremely ungrateful. But to become extremely grateful, very few people can do that. So Allah conveys that.
So, kafur is extremely ungrateful.
Right. So Shakir is grateful, but Shakur is extremely grateful. That's why Allah did not use Shakur here. Is that clear? So it's such subtle differences that if you know Arabic language, you can really appreciate all these, and in the translation it's hard to convey. It's hard to put that forward. Sometimes the tafsir of Qur'an tries to explain some of that, but a lot of times in the translation you will lose that. So when we talk about subtleties of the language and the beauty and the meaning and the language, that's what these examples can give you an idea. Another issue with the translations of the Quran, now moving to slide 7, is the qualifications of the translators. It is important that the translator of Quran is faithful to the message of Quran and also objective, with, does the job of translation in an objective way, without any biases, without any kind of preconceived notions. And not only the faithfulness of the translator is important, but the knowledge of the translator is very important in terms of Arabic language and the grammar of the language, so that the person can pick up all the different shades of the meanings, and so they are accurate in the translation. Beyond knowing the language of Arabic, they also need to know the sciences of Quran. The rest of sciences that we covered in the beginning of the presentation, all those sciences and much more they have to know, because that will explain sometimes the intent of the verse, the historical or the sectional context of the verse. Also, the translator should have a very good knowledge of the target language. If he is translating into English, not only he should know the Arabic very well, but the English also language very well, the literature of language, the different styles of presentation and wording, and all the subtleties of the target language also he should know. And these issues, when they are covered, then a translation can become a better translation and a more genuine translation that you can trust and depend, inshallah. Okay, so far we have been talking about the translations of Quran in terms of history, that what was the debate initially among the scholars, and what was the final solution, and how the translation can be missing certain aspects of the language. And we gave some examples, the difference between the word shakur and shakir and kafur and kafir. That shakir is grateful, but shakur is very grateful all the time for little things, for big things, in a very consistent manner. So that's why Allah says that very little of my servants will be in the state of shakur. You have seen some people, one time you do some favor to them, for the rest of their lives, always they say, I remember that you did that favor to me, and they express their thanks in one way or the other. Every time I say, wait a minute, I did that to everybody, why you're taking it? No, I cannot forget that. So for every little thing towards everybody, not just towards one person, towards their spouse, towards their children, towards others, always they are grateful. Yes.
How is that different from one of the names of Allah, which is Shakur?
The name of Allah also is Shakir and Shakur. So Allah has chosen that name for himself also, that he is Shakir and he is Shakur. So he is Shakir in the sense that he appreciates our efforts, not in the sense of grateful, but appreciation. And Shakur, that is extremely appreciative of our efforts. That we do a little thing, Allah gives a lot of rewards for that. That's the concept of Allah's names for Shakir and Shakur. Okay, any questions so far? Yes.
So just to go back to Shakir and Kafur, so the aim of the choices is that, what I understood, I don't know if I'm wrong, or is that there are a lot of people who are ungrateful, but a lot of people who are grateful?
The point is that a lot of people can easily become ungrateful to a high degree. People, you have seen some people, you do so many favors to them, just one thing goes wrong, you say, you have never done any good to me. Right? Sometimes even spouses say to each other, sometimes other family members, your parents who have done everything for you all along their life, just because one thing they did not buy for you or one thing that they did not do according to your wishes, say, Dad, Mom, you never listen to me, you never do any favor to me, you never do any, never. So this is the kind of, kafur, that you go to gratitude or ingratitude to an extreme degree that you forget all the favors. People can easily become that. People, human beings. But to extremely be grateful and to consistently be grateful and to persistently be grateful, it doesn't happen all the time. The phone is, somebody is, look at the phone, there's a phone there, if it belongs to anyone. Okay, I have to announce lost and found also here. Okay, yes, any other question?
In one of the ayahs, Surah 4, verse 79, where it says, good deeds possible only with the support of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but sins are from humans. I need a little bit more clarity on this, because this also touches on free will. Is this to say that Allah subhanahu, you may have the intention, but the amal, the actual amal of you going, let's say you wanted to go give charity, you may have the intention, but for you to be able to actually do it, Allah has to support it. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the question is about the free will versus the fact that we say that every good deed that you do it's from Allah. So Allah has given us the freedom of will, that you can do good and bad. But for good, you are the one who make the intention. And Allah will support you with the facilitation of the action. So He also says He is creating the action for you to enable you to function and to do the good. So nothing good we can do without the help and support of Allah. But bad things, we have the freedom. Allah will not prevent us, but Allah does not like it, and Allah will not support it, will not give additional support. Allah will allow it, but will not give additional support like for good deeds. So it doesn't affect freedom of will. Okay? All right, moving on. Now, the translations of Qur'an, scholars who were debating about the translations of Qur'an, they also said, look, that some translation has taken place even during the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Yes, the whole Qur'an was not translated in his time or later, until much later, but there were some passages of Quran, some parts of Quran that were translated even during his lifetime. For example, when Muslims went from Mecca, they migrated to Abyssinia, to Ethiopia of today. The famous story is that these immigrants, they went and they, recited the Quran in front of the king of Ethiopia, Najashi or Negus, and he was so affected. So he didn't know Arabic, so obviously they did not read the Arabic, they read the translation of it so that he can understand the meaning. So that means that the translation was done by the companions of the Prophet. Also, the Prophet ﷺ, after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, he sent letters of invitation to Islam to different kings and different leaders and different emperors of the world. And some of the letters included verses of Quran also. And so those verses of Quran must have been translated because they would not know Arabic. So those verses were sent with the translations of Quran, like the verse 64 in Surah Al Imran that says, "Ta'ala ila ma kalimatullah," that it will come to the word of Allah. Also, Salman al-Farsi, who was a companion of the Prophet ﷺ, he was originally from Fars, and he knew Farsi language. So he has been also reported to have translated some passages of Quran to people in Fars, and some converts who were accepting Islam. He translated some verses. So some translation did take place during the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, after the agreement of the translations that, okay, we should move ahead and translate the Quran, and the scholars agreed upon it with those reservations, they moved ahead, and the Quran was initially translated in Syriac language, Persian language, Indian and Turkish languages. These were the initial languages in the first 2-3 centuries of Islam that Quran was translated. And then other Eastern languages followed that. However, Western languages did not have a translation of Quran until much later. For the first time in 1143, so about 5 centuries later after the beginning of Islam, the first time that Quran was translated into a European language was a Latin language. And this was done by Robertus Reticenus, that he, in 1143, translated it into Latin, and then that was further translated in Italian and German and Dutch. So about 5 centuries later. And then the first French translation took place in 1647, about 1,000 years later after Islam. And that was done by André du Royer, and this guy, which translated in French, then a British guy called Alexander Ross, he translated from French into English. So the very first English translation of Quran came out in 1649, about 1,000 years after the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And as you can imagine, the initial translations of Quran in English had all kinds of issues that we'll talk about. But until 2017, that the number of languages that have been counted, 98 languages now. The Quran is available in translations in 98 languages. Yes.
Point about the English translation. So it's translated from French to English, or is it?
The very first one was from French to English, but then later on, then the other scholars translated from Arabic to English. But this first translation was full of mistakes and distortions, first because it was translated from French, so already in French they had lost certain things, and then translation from translation that adds more changes. And we will talk about the first few translations in a minute. So translations of Quran have been done by non-Muslims. Translations of Quran have been done by some other Muslims who are considered deviated Muslims by the mainstream Muslims, such as Ahmadis or Qadianis. And translations of Quran, there are some of them which are widely used, we will talk about it. And then we will talk about some recommended translations for you that from now on you can focus and use it. The initial translations of Quran were all done by non-Muslims in English. Alexander Ross was the first one. Can someone help from this side to remove that part of the screen from the bottom right? And it's taking some time. It didn't work.
Not gonna know if there's restart the TV, and we didn't want to do that.
Okay. Alexander Ross translated from French into English, call it Al-Quran of Muhammad. And he had all kinds of distortions. The second guy, about 90 years later, George Sale, and his translation is still around. He translated, and he also had many distortions and changes in the Quran. After that, Rodwell, and then Palmer and Richard Bell. These are the very first 5 translations of Quran that took place within 3 centuries, between 1649 and 1937. And all of them were full of changes. Actually, all 5 of these people, if you study them, they were missionaries. They were Christian missionaries. And they could not hide their biases. When you read their translation in the first page, they themselves say that, reader, please pay attention, this book is not book of God, this is crafted by Muhammad, and he calls it book of God. They say it in the first page of the translation, most of them, at least 3 of them say that. And others, they say it indirectly. I mean, as a translator, you just translate it and leave it for the reader to judge it. Why do you judge here, in the beginning? And why do you show your bias towards the Quran? So they did that. And also in the meaning, wherever they could change, they changed. For example, the many verses of Quran starts with Ya ayyuhan nas, which means, oh people, oh human beings. You know, one of these guys, George Sale, everywhere it says Ya ayyuhan nas, oh human beings, he translated, oh people of Mecca. Oh people of Mecca. So that the readers get an idea that this Quran was meant for people of Mecca. This was not meant for all people, for all human beings. Yes.
There is one by the title Richard Bell.
Yes.
Quran translated with the crucial of the arrangement of surahs.
Yes. And this guy, he changed the order of surahs also. He said that, the surahs actually should be organized like this. He used his own kind of thinking. And he said, we should have this surah first, the next surah, this should be like this surah should be like this. Why? He said, I don't see the coherence between the surahs, so he said it will be coherent if you organize it this other way. So can you imagine the amount of distortion that take place? Yes?
Yeah, I'm just wondering where these translations are kept now.
They are still around. They are still around. If you go to Library of Sterling here, you will see most of them.
But that must be some misguidance for.
And unfortunately, so now we realize where the misconceptions in the Western world started about Islam. The misunderstandings of Islam did not start with some Islamophobes, like these days we have, but it started with translations of Quran. And so these missionaries, when they saw that a lot of Christians in Middle East, when the message of Islam reached them, they accepted Islam. Middle East was full of Christians. All the countries in Middle East, Syria, Egypt, Lebanon and Palestine, and all of them were Christians. And when they received the message of Islam, almost all of them accepted Islam. So they were concerned that if message of Islam reaches Europe, then Christians will all, mostly, many of them will accept Islam and embrace Islam. So to prevent that in their understanding, in their efforts, they said, let us, before other people translate, we translate it and we tell them that, hey, this is not a book to be trusted. This is not like something that you should read. So that was their intent, apparently, as it's becoming clear through their statements. Now, there is one non-Muslim who translated the Quran, A.J. Arbery. He is the only one who has done an objective work. He is the only translator of Quran that his translation is not biased, and it is really one of the good translations of Quran. And he himself admits, even though he says I'm a non-Muslim, but I admit that Quran is not translatable. Quran is so vast and so sophisticated that a human being cannot translate this book. He admitted. Yes.
Quick question. You mentioned, I think the first one was translated from
French.
to English. Were any of the other ones?
The other ones were translated from Arabic.
All of them.
All four of them, yeah. The other four, yeah. And then N.J. Daoud is also a person who had Jewish background. He translated the Quran, and it's still very commonly used. It's not a bad translation. It has some good aspects, but there are some issues also. And you will realize that no translation of Quran is perfect. Every translation has some kind of issues. But depending on what kind of issues, is it really intentional distortions or just mistakes or errors? Yes.
Do we, as a Muslim community or Muslim world, have any sort of governing body which looks at minimum standards for any translation for us to?
The question is, do we have as a Muslim community some standards and some institutions? There are some, alhamdulillah, we have like national organizations in America, ISNA, ICNA, MAS, and then we have Fiqh Council of North America, and we have different groups of scholars, jurisprudence scholars and others. But the problem is that in the Western societies, there is freedom of press. So anybody can translate and write anything and take it to the publisher and publish it. No one can stop that.
No,
While in Muslim countries, you have to go through approval process by the scholars before you can publish something, especially about Quran and about Islam. Now, yes, so scholars have tried to say that which translations are authentic, which are not. And that's why I'm presenting here the different translations to you as part of that kind of effort. But still, translations will come out. You can expect in the next few years many other translations that will come out based on the desires of different individuals and groups. Okay, but please remember that these translations, unfortunately, until today, they are around in the libraries, public libraries, and it's you and me. It's our job to go to the library and tell them that, hey, these translations are not trustworthy translations from Muslims' point of view. Give them a few better translations. And some libraries will accept that. Some may not accept, some will accept. So let's do this job, each one of us, wherever we are, go to our public libraries and see what kind of translations they have. And if we find some of these translations, tell them that, hey, this is not a good translation. Now, some other translations of Quran in English, which are done by Muslims' names and Muslim names, and you say, okay, this is a Muslim, but it could be some Muslims who are not considered mainstream Muslims. By mainstream Muslims, they are considered deviated people. One of those groups is called Ahmadis or Qadianis. So this group started in India, by a person called Ghulam Ahmad, who in the place of Qadian, that he, claimed to be a prophet himself. And he said that Muhammad is not the final prophet. The path of prophets are open still, and I'm a prophet. So then he came up with certain ideologies and thoughts that he affected some of the ideas in Islam and principles in Islam. And then that group is now around here in America, and they are around. And in Muslim world, they are all recognized. They are, officially, Muslim countries have announced them as a deviated group. But in America and other places, they are, they say we're Muslims, and they even publish the Qur'an. So these translations are done by scholars of that school. Muhammad Ali is one of the famous ones that's around. Ghulam Sarwar, Sher Ali, Salahuddin Pir, Malik Ghulam Farid, and Zafarullah Khan.
So is that the Nation of Islam?
No, it's not Nation of Islam. Nation of Islam is different here in America, but this is in Muslim world, and that's started in India.
They also have an app now with those translations.
Yes, especially the first one, Muhammad Ali, is very widely used, and a lot of people use that translation. Now, another translation by another person who's said, I'm a Muslim, Rashad Khalifa. Rashad Khalifa was the one who also came up with a formula of 19, if you heard about it, mathematical formula, that he said that all the verses of Qur'an are the number, number 19 is a very unique and a special number, that all the numbering within the verses and within surahs are divisible by 19, and he used the verse of 19 angels that Allah has mentioned in the hellfire. So he came up with a theory, but his theory was proved to be wrong, and it doesn't apply in many surahs and many verses. And then later on, he also claimed that I'm a prophet of God. And he came up with other ideas about Qur'an. And one day he was in Arizona, and a person went and stabbed him, and he was killed. But his translation is still popular among certain circles and certain people. They are the people who, one of the opinions of this guy was that we don't need hadith, we don't need the sunnah, we just need the Qur'an. Qur'an is enough for us. And so the followers of this group, they call themselves, they're part of another group called Ahlul Qur'an. Excuse me. Yes.
So was he coming to be an imam or actually a prophet?
He also was acting as an imam. He was giving khutbahs on Fridays, and then he claimed towards the end of his life that I'm also a prophet of God. Yeah. So in his translation, he bashes Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam everywhere. Like when Allah says to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if you do not convey the message, then this will happen to you. Allah addresses the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in many ways that, but then he says, look, God did not trust the Prophet. That's why God told him, so he was not trustworthy. Was making that kind of childish conclusions.
What was his native language?
He was an Arab.
From
I don't know which country, but he was an Arab. Okay? So you have to be careful about this translation also. Now, the translations that are widely used today, not necessarily recommended, but widely used. George Sale is still being used widely. Remember, actually, George Sale's translation was with one of the presidents of America from the founding fathers, Franklin, was Franklin what? Thomas Jefferson also had it, and one of the congressmen from Minnesota, he took oath with this translation, in the Library of, in the Congress, if you remember, he used this translation. Now they have published another version of this, by the way. So they have removed some of those distortions because the Muslim community was very noisy about it about 40 years ago. So they published another version that they have removed some of those, but it's still under the same name of author. Okay, so Muhammad Ali was from this Ahmadi group, also is widely used. A.J. Arbery, who's a non-Muslim but a very objective scholar. Muhammad Marmaduke Pickthall, he was the first one who translated the Quran whose mother language was English. Pickthall translated, he was a convert and he translated using kind of heavy Jacobian language, ancient language, but it's still a good translation. Abdullah Yusuf Ali also translated the Quran. It's one of the widely used and trustworthy translations now. Taqiyuddin Hilali and Muhammad Muhsin Khan, and then Muhammad Asad and Zafar Ishaq Ansari. So these are the widely used. But what I'm recommending, the translations that I'm recommending to you are the following. Zafar Ishaq Ansari translation, which is actually based on Maulana Maududi's tafsir. So he uses that tafsir, but he did the translation himself. Based on that tafsir he gives. And the nice thing about it is that he also has some commentary, some brief commentary. And we'll talk about it later, that some commentary is needed in every translation. Ayub Hamid is another scholar who is in Canada. He has translated the Quran. It's still not published in paper, but it has been published in the website. Very nice translation. His translation is interpretive translation. So he says that my translation is not literal, it's interpretive, based on interpretation he has translated. But sometimes you may argue about some words. M.A.S. Abdul Halib is another good translation, who is a professor in Oxford University. Very beautiful prose. You know, he has done a good job in terms of prose form that, you know, you keep reading and you like. It's very easy reading. Taqi Usmani is another great scholar from Pakistan who has done a very good translation with some commentary. It is available in QuranExplorer.com also. That I'm giving references at the end for availability of these. Abdullah Yusuf Ali and Pickthall, they both use kind of archaic English. So if you recommend the translation of Quran to someone who has Bible background, these two are the best. The Yusuf Ali and Pickthall translation. They will love to read this Quran if they are familiar with King James Version of Bible, because it uses similar kind of language. Sahih International is an improved version of Taqiyuddin Hilali and Mohsin Khan, which is much better in terms of language and also explanations. Ali Unal is a Turkish scholar which has good extensive commentary with explanations. And the study Quran that came out recently in the last couple of years by Sayyid Hussein Nasser and a few other scholars, Shia Sunni scholars, they translated together in the US, and that has some good features. And so these are some recommended translations that from now on, you check your own translation, what translation you're using. If you're using an app, find out that app uses which translation. Usually they say that. And also for your family and relatives, try to give them these recommended translations so they can use the right translation. Yes?
One of the translations that I'm reading right now that I really like is by Dr. Mustafa Fatah. It's called the Clear Quran. And it's also approved by Al-Azhar University.
Yes.
The thing I like about that is he has broken the surahs by sections and give headings of what topic is being discussed or what theme is being discussed. That's a very good one. The other one that I like is Yahya Emerick. And what I like about that particular translation is that he provides background on specific verses to provide the context, and then also has footnotes. In the footnotes, he has relevant hadiths as well. So I think those two are also good.
Right. Yes, so the brother is mentioning two other translations, one the Clear Quran and the other one by Yahya Emerick. Yes, they are both good translations. They're not the best, but they are good translations. And please understand that this list is not exhaustive. This is not the final list. There are some good translations like that available beyond this. But you know, myself, my PhD thesis was on English translations of Quran, so I spent 4 years reviewing all these different translations and comparing and contrasting different translations. So I came up with this list and I added one or two later. And those translations also came after my PhD thesis. But I have reviewed them and alhamdulillah, yes, they are good. Yes?
Just a quick question on the last one, the study Quran. Is there any influence on the translation from because it's done by a team of Sunni and Shia professors? Any distortions or?
So about the study Quran, the question is there any influence by different understandings? Yes, that's why some scholars have concerns about it, and but they have tried to you know, be in the middle way as much as possible, the scholars, but still there are some you know, pushes you can see in certain parts. But overall, it's okay. Yes.
One more question. Which one do you recommend for the non-Muslims? Which one would be?
Depending on their background, if they have you know, Bible background and they are into the Bible and they love continue reading Bible, as I said, those two, Yusuf Ali and Muhammad Pickthall. Other ones who want more modern English, youth, you know, other people who are not much into the Bible, but they are thinking and asking questions. The very first one, Zafar Isaq Ansari and Ayub Hamid and you know, Abdul Halim, any of them are the first top three are very good translations. All of these in the list are good translations for anybody. And for Muslims also, you want to read those translations that have more tafsir. And you know, remember that, because we'll talk about the importance of tafsir, and you will start to appreciate more the translations that have tafsir. Okay. Yes?
What should we do if we have not recommended translation?
We have to first make sure that it's not one of those that are, we have said that don't read that, you know. So first, you will make sure that it's not one of those translations that we said are problematic translations. If it's not in the list of problematic translations, then it's okay, but you may want to eventually move to these recommended translations. Yes?
So we have a question from Sister Sarah, and she asks, how about the Qurans here in our mosques? Are they credited and legit, meaning unbiased?
Usually in the mosques, we have good translations, but sometimes some people bring a translation and leave it there. So not everybody, you know, has knowledge about the translations to check it out or to understand. So sometimes it's possible that some translation finds its way in the mosque. So you have to be careful. But in general, the masajid will have good translations. Okay. All right, now let's do a comparative analysis of some different translations so that you can see the differences of translations and you can appreciate the differences also. Here I'm showing I'm in slide 15 for those of you who are online. Slide 15 has the 4 different translations of Surah Al-Asr. Surah Al-Asr is one of the shortest surahs of Quran. That's 3 verses only and can be written in 1 line or 1.5 line, the whole thing. And I'm sharing with you 4 different translations by 4 translators who are considered authentic translations, and all 4 of them are from the recommended list. But to see the differences, and I want you to read all 4 and let's discuss the differences. So read carefully each column. Are you ready to discuss? So what do you think? Let me ask the first question. Which translation you think you like overall?
You're gonna get probably 20 different answers.
That's what I expect. Yes.
I would say Yusuf Ali is like the most accurate.
Yeah.
Like he's very, very careful with how he translates words and he doesn't add anything extra.
Very accurate. Okay. You're saying that Yusuf Ali is the very accurate. Okay, next. Raise your hand. Yes.
Abdul Halim is really easy to understand.
Abdul Halim is really easy to understand. Okay.
So I took my Shahada in January, and Masa Ali, how do you say that, Ali?
Yeah, Abdul
The
Halim.
first one is very easy to understand as a person changing from Christianity.
So as you converted and accepted
Yes.
Islam and started to read the Quran, this was very easy for you.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Which one was that?
And the first one, MAS Abdul Halim. Okay. Yes.
Abdul Halim in the third column.
Ansari Maududi.
They're kind of similar. So, man is in loss, man is in state of loss, and then for like the bottom column, except good deeds urge one another to the truth and urge one another to steadfastness. And the other one, it talks about kind of like steadfast and to accept for those who believe in good deeds and accept those who have faith and do righteous deeds. So it's kind of similar.
MashaAllah. Very good observations. What's your name? Zakaria. How old? 11 years old. MashaAllah, Zakaria is 11 years old and he's making observations, very critical observations about the different translations. And he's explaining why he likes those two translations of Emmaus Abdul Halim and Sorry, and what similarities he see in both of them. Subhanallah, Allahu Akbar. Very good. We are proud of you, Zakaria. Alhamdulillah. What else? Any other observations, thoughts?
My preference is Ayub Hamid, partly because I've read his extensive tafsir on Surah Al-Asr. I find it very interpretive, as he himself stated. In the first, if you take the first ayah, as evidenced by rapidly passing time, it kind of paints a picture. There's a lot more to it than just saying by time. It tells you that it gives you, there's so much more depth into it when you start understanding what he's trying to say.
Yep, so the brother is saying that Ayub Hamid translation is much better for him because he has read the tafsir of them and the explanations, and for the first verse, Wal Asr, how it is explained, and it gives a picture. Yes.
There is one thing, like if you read the Arabic and if you know a little bit of Arabic, the word sabr is not there in two translations, which are easy to understand, but they were missing the point. Yes, it's true, it's honest, you're on this right path, you follow it, but like all the aspect of an Arabic is not fully translated in these two translations, which is Alim, though it's easier to understand, and the other one Ayub Hamid.
Yeah, so the word sabr, the sister is talking about the word sabr, how it's picked up. So you see that, Abdul Halim is using the word steadfastness for sabr, and Ayub Hamid is using perseverance, and Yusuf Ali is using patience and constancy.
Exactly. So the direct related word of sabr is kind of patience, which is directly related to it, which is easier.
Yeah, patience and constancy. So that's why you use both words. So and that to a lot of people, perseverance or steadfastness is what it is, because sabr is not a passive thing that you just sit down and you keep quiet. No, sabr also means continuity. You start a good deed and you have sabr in it, meaning that you have istiqamah, you have continuity, and you don't stop the good deed in spite of the pressure. So that's also sabr. You continue struggling in the right path. Yes.
So what I've also learned about this surah is that God addresses us first in a single person like for us to reflect that you're on your own and lost and there is no one else. But then he moves to accept for those who believe and then accept those to tell us that we only when we are in a community and when we surround each other with good people, that's when we can leave the state of loss. So that contrast is necessary, and that's what in the Ayub Hamid's translation is lost.
Right. Let me just elaborate a little more on that. So the sister is picking up the difference between an insan, a single person, and then ladina, the plural, that's those of you. So insan, the word insan means a single human being or also the whole humanity. So it can be plural or it can be singular. If you mean the whole humanity, then in that case it is plural. If it is just a single human being, it applies to both. So human insan can be as everyone, as a person, as a citizen, as a family, as a humanity. Yes. Sorry, there was another hand first. Yes, and then you.
So, I mean, it also lets you appreciate, the conciseness of Arabic language. Like, if you look at the word sabr, it's just one single word in Arabic. But, no one is able to kind of, capture that one word, and they're using so many other words, but they're just not able to fully capture the depth of that word.
Yes, very nice. Yes. So the sister is saying that the word sabr is translated in so many words, and they are all still correct and accurate, and there is still more words to cover the word sabr. Yes. Yes, that brother, yes.
Yeah, I was just saying a takeaway that's a little bit different. I was told this several times before. I think this just makes the point, which is everybody would have a different translation that would be, he would see that would be the best, as you said, depending on their background. But I think it also gives us the message that it's very important that we learn the mother language, which is Arabic, to be able to really comprehend it to the utmost or to the best way possible. So I think this is also one of the things that would encourage us to learn the mother tongue of
Yes, so that's a very good point that our brother is making, that you, while you see the differences of translation and they are all correct, that should encourage us to learn the original language of Arabic so that we can appreciate more. Yes, brother.
I was actually just going off this brother's topic that he just talked about, and it's kind of crazy because even when you hear like witness stories of people telling a story, you'll hear somebody say the guy was wearing a red shirt, the guy was wearing a blue shirt, and nobody really knows what it was, and everybody has their own opinion of what they think is best, and that's exactly what we're seeing is the same thing written four different ways, but you really have to decide which one is the
meaning is lost in translation.
And by the way, all these translations are authentic translations, so there's no inaccuracies.
Right.
They're all correct, but different shades of the correctness. Yes.
In the second verse, Inna al-insan, wouldn't the most accurate translation be human beings and not man? Because insan is man, not the correct translation is human beings, not necessarily man.
Yeah, so the question is whether the word insan is correctly translated as man or human beings is the correct. Both is correct, because if you look at the history, throughout the history, the word man has been used both for men and women. I know it is not, it is recently only with a lot of, focus on being extra careful and sensitive about these things that now people are trying to use the word human beings. So the word man not only meant masculine, but it meant men and women. Just like, in English we still use the word guys, which says man and woman, yes.
So you have done enough research on it. When you call a translation a good translation, what does that mean? That the translation is conveying the message?
Okay, very good question. Now, the question is, when we say a good translation, what are we talking about? So, faithfulness to that, to be faithful in the message of Qur'an. Objectivity is another standard factor to be considered. Knowledge of the original language, knowledge of the target language, qualifications of the translator in terms of abilities to understand the Quran, sciences of Quran, and even the Sirah, the Hadith, all the other different aspects of Islamic knowledge. Also, being versatile in the human knowledge that we have about different things. So ideally, a good translation would be the translation that's done by multiple people with different expertise. Some verses of Quran, for example, which are ahkam, which are verses which has injunctions of Quran or the rulings of Quran, it's ideal to be translated with someone who has knowledge of fiqh and knowledge of jurisprudence. Verses which talks about the stories of Quran would be ideal to be translated by someone who is very capable in terms of expressing the story with very eloquent wording and sentence that comes to overall, but especially for stories. Examples of Quran, someone who has good knowledge of philosophy will be helpful. To philosophically you make the points very logically with good wisdom. So you can see that there are different qualifications needed for the translation of Quran. But overall, if you see an accurate translation, if you see a good engaging translation, that when you read it, it engages you with good communication skills, with good language and eloquency, these are some of the features that we are looking for. Yes, two hands at the same time. You haven't asked any questions, so go ahead.
I have a question with that.
Yes.
Translation here, the one says living truth, and the other one says teaching the truth. But what will happen is actually leave the truth, not leave for the teaching. We said what will happen. It's not only the belief, or it's not only the teaching, but the deed itself.
Yes. So all of them says exhorting to truth, right?
Now, one says teaching the truth.
No, all four of them say truth.
But it says the mutual teaching of truth.
In the mutual teachings of truth.
Right.
So
What I'm saying is not only the teaching, but the action.
yeah, so haq, as you know in Arabic, haq means the truth. Haq means also right, like a right of a person. And haq means also is a word name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's basically the source of truth. So he has tried to capture the truth, but also real teachings of the truth. So not only the haq, but the teachings that come based on truth. He's trying to add a little extra measures. And you're arguing that it should be only limited to truth. It can be, and it's not wrong to say that, but yeah, if you just want to say the truth, then it's...
What I meant was, when we know about the truth, we believe in it, but actually in the deeds and action, we do. Some people know about it, they don't do it. Some people believe in it, they don't do it.
So, no, Amilus Salihat is that righteous deeds. So you're connecting here iman with action, with haq, with deeds. It's separate here. So tawasaw that illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat covers everything. And then as part of good deeds, Allah is emphasizing on two other good deeds. Okay, we have to move on. Go ahead if it's important.
Just sometimes, what I do is I combine the translation to make it sound, for it to flow, and also to be true to the Arabic language. So, for example, in the second verse it says, "Innal insana lafi khusr." The first two translations don't mention indeed or verily, and the other two do. So, and then in the Yusuf Tariq translation it says, "Verily man is in loss." If I were to look at that, I would say, verily or indeed, human beings are in loss, just to make sure that I'm staying true.
And there are some translations who just said exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
So there are among all these different translations, you will see that all different possible possibilities are covered. So you can go with that translation that is more appropriate from your point of view. And sometimes, yes, you can mix, but you have to be careful not to change the meaning. So if you do that, I have to keep going if I may.
So, I mean, it also shows that, you know, if I look at the first two ayahs, like well asked and then I won't be able to really get the whole gist, like what Allah is trying to say without the tafsir. So, I mean, maybe for the third one, the translation is really clear, just like, you know, reading the translation, but the first two, I really need to know the tafsir in order to.
Right. Yes, so the sister is saying the first two verses needs tafsir in order to understand that. You're right. Yes, so the importance of tafsir is the other thing that we're going to talk about it. But let me quickly give you an idea about this surah. This surah is basically a formula of salvation, a formula of success. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says it very briefly and very quickly, that lots of books can be written about it. That Allah says that every human being will be a loser. And when? In the day of judgment. In the day of judgment, every human being will be a loser except the people who have four characteristics. Except the people who have belief in the truth, belief in Allah and the prophets and the books of Allah in the next life, you know, and angels. That's the first characteristic. Second characteristic, that they have to act upon the belief requirements, that they have to do the good deeds, the deeds that are required. And third, that they should share the truth with others and promote the truth and counsel each other towards the truth. And fourth, that they should counsel each other in constancy and in sabr. Because when you start promoting the truth, then there will be all kinds of hurdles in front of you, all kinds of barriers in front of you. People will start saying, oh, come on, now this guy is telling us what to do, what not to do. This guy is now criticizing our life or our behavior and this and that. You know, then they start labeling you, they start marking you, they start saying so many things about you, so you'll be discouraged not to say anymore. But you need sabr. Allah says, then you should, promote the sabr and constancy so that you can continue doing the good deeds, so that you can continue to share the truth. So Allah says that basically, not only you should have the iman and the good deeds yourself, but you should also be active in sharing the truth with others. You should be active helping others to understand the truth, and you should be always encouraging others to be patient and perseverant, and you yourself should be perseverant. So Allah gives this formula, and Allah swears with asr, takes an oath with time. See, Allah is not like us to take an oath for things that, for certain reasons we usually take an oath to establish credibility and, to establish foundation for some, but Allah doesn't need those kind of things. Allah swears because He wants to prove something which comes next. With things that are tangible, He wants to prove something which is not tangible. So time is a tangible entity that we can all see and we can measure it. And we all know the importance of time. As they say, time is money, time is life, time. So everybody knows the value of time. Allah takes an oath with time to prove something which is not tangible, the reality of next life. The reality of next life is not something that you can see it right now and you can understand it. So Allah usually takes an oath with things that are tangible, وَالشَّمْسِ وَالْقَمَرِ. Allah takes an oath with things that are visible to us, that are tangible, to make a point about things that are not tangible to us, that are hidden from us, about next life, about angels, about other things. So that's the purpose of taking an oath. And Allah takes an oath with time to prove that that's the reality about next life. Next life, everybody will regret their life unless they have spent their life in these four things. Unless their time is spent with these four activities, your time is wasted. Your time is wasted. Whatever you're doing, your time is wasted unless it's spent in these four activities. But these four are very broad, and it could cover your profession, it could cover your family life, everything, as long as you do it in the right way. I have to keep moving because we have to have an assignment. So I have another example, and I want you to look at. By the way, the Isha prayer is at 9:15 tonight. Do we agree to stay a few more minutes after 9? Anyone has a problem that has to leave at 9? Okay, in that case, then we can go through this example also. Read this example and let me know your thoughts comparing the translations of two translators. Read it, please, critically. Don't talk to each other, read. We're on slide 16 now, comparing the verses from Surah Al-Fatir, Surah 35. Slide 16. Okay, any thoughts? Yes.
I personally prefer the first one because it says it addresses people saying all mankind. It's like it's for everybody. Whereas the second one, all people, you feel like it's for specific people or like region or not.
Mm-hmm.
You don't feel like it's not inclusive.
Okay, what else?
I prefer the first one too because it goes right to the point.
Yeah, any other features?
No.
Okay, so they're saying that the first one, she likes it because of the use of mankind.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah.
Sisters, excuse me.
Hayya ala salah.
Just once.
Hayya ala salah. Hayya ala falah. Hayya ala falah. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah.
Okay, before anyone, if anyone has to leave because the class was supposed to be until 9, please understand that there's an assignment this week, and I'm going to give you a homework, which is the last 3 slides. That's Surah Fatiha, that you have to sit down, and I'm giving 3 translations and 3 tafsirs that I'm going to send by email to you by tomorrow. And you have to sit down and do a very deep analysis of Surah Fatiha by 3 different translators and mufassirin. And you have to really, inshallah, you will learn a lot. You will learn a lot from it because you need to. I have many other surahs in mind, but because those of you who are not very familiar with Surah Fatiha, I thought, you want to become very familiar with the surah because you're using it in the prayer and the salat every day and every rakat of the prayer. So you want to get a good understanding of this surah. So three different sources. The last 3 slides give you that assignment, and I'm going to send you by tomorrow the details of the assignment. So please stay tuned for tomorrow to read the assignment and start working on it. And the assignment is due by this Sunday evening. So you have 3-4 days to do the assignment. And let me know if anything comes up or any issues, anything. Okay, so those of you who have to leave, just know that. But if you stay a few more minutes, we'll cover some more points that's important. Any question?
You mentioned that if they haven't received email from us, then.
If anybody has not received emails from the class, so please make sure to see the sisters to give your email address so that you're registered and you receive the emails, because we communicate through email a lot. Okay. So now thoughts about these 2 verses. These 2 verses, as you can tell, they are very important verses, and they have a very strong message. But the 2 translators have some subtle differences in terms of choice of words that they have chosen. And those subtle differences also tells you a lot of things. So the word people versus mankind. So your nas, it is correct to translate it both ways, or people or mankind. People can mean a group of people, or it could also mean the whole humanity. But mankind definitely is a word for the whole humanity. So if you say, oh, humanity, now if you have a group of people and you want to address them and make it so more personal to those people, then you want to say, oh, people, like, oh, readers of Qur'an, oh, Muslims, or oh, people who have heard about Islam, so you're trying to make it more personal to some group of people, versus the whole mankind. And sometimes the word mankind is better if you are trying to say to the whole humanity. So it is correct to translate it either way. Okay, more, come on, quickly, any other thoughts? Yes.
Well, the translation by Hamid is a bit more descriptive, or I think it captures the essence a bit more. When I read the second, well, there's a few items, but the second ayah where it says, nor let the deluder delude you, you're not really sure who
the deluder is.
Who the deluder is. Whereas in this one it says it's targeting Satan. In the same way above in the previous ayah, Ayub Hamid explains that to believe in mythical gods, whereas the other one kind of is a bit vague. You don't get the essence of it. Assuming that is the essence.
Yes. Those are good points. Yes. So there's more description. Yes.
On that note, is it because that, like, for example, in the second ayah, the deluder, could that mean other than shaitan? Like maybe something else is deluded? Perverted, like something else is perverted?
Most of the Mufassirin agree that it is shaitan, but it could be also followers of shaitan. So it could be in the form of jinn or human beings. It could be it could be someone in your life, in your family, someone in your friends, that will hang out with you and they deceive you. Sometimes, you read a book and you're influenced so much that you stop believing in Islam or practicing Islam. So that could be also the deluder. But it's certainly shaitan has a role to play, but it's not only shaitan, yes.
Could also be some form of literacy, like a book or film or...
Yes, of course, true that. Yeah.
I think there's a difference in like call to action, consider versus remember. Consider is like calls for us to like reflect on. Remember is just like straight remember about it.
Right. Uzkuru in Arabic could mean remember, could also mean pay attention, or have you considered this situation? Yes, very good point. Yes.
The first translation translates Allah to God. The second translation uses the word Allah in the translation.
Yeah, so the choice of word Allah versus the word God in English. Yes. Okay, so now you have an idea about the subtleties of the differences between authentic translations. the next couple slides, I just cover a couple more points and then we will go inshallah for prayer and finish the class. The translator does need to have a good knowledge of the tafsir. And usually translation is done based on tafsir. So you have to be really familiar with different opinions, different ideas about the verse so that you can capture that in your translation as much as possible, like what Ayub Ahmed was trying to do. And translator needs to add it. Why? Because sometimes it needs to clarify, sometimes it needs to elaborate, sometimes it needs to bring other things that we'll talk about tafsir benefits in the next class more, and another slide, a couple slides later, some other points that tafsir brings so many other aspects of the meaning that you really want to. And the translators who are really familiar with tafsir, then they try to capture that as much as possible in the translation. And that's why translators sometimes use parentheses, parenthetical remarks within the text, or sometimes they use footnotes, and that's essential. Otherwise, translation will not be clear. Why this commentary is needed in the parentheses or footnotes? Because sometimes there are some historical facts in Qur'an, right? Qur'an mentions some names, some tribes' names, some people, Muhajirin, Ansar, Ad, Thamud, all these words. Someone who is not familiar with all the history of Islam and the background behind it will not know what Qur'an is talking about. It has to be explained in the parenthesis or as a footmark. Sometimes there are some geographic facts, mentioning locations, for example, Safa, Marwa, Mount of Sinai, sacred mosque, farthest mosque. These things are mentioned in the Qur'an. If you don't have that knowledge, you will not know what Qur'an is talking about. You need some parenthetical explanations. Sometimes Islamic terminology, such as the word salat, siyam, zakat, hajj, tayammum, jinn, jahannam, jannah. These words have a special Islamic meaning in addition to what it means in Arabic. For example, the word salah. Salah in Arabic could mean celebration, it could mean connection, it has multiple meanings, but in Islamic terminology, salah is that prescribed daily prayer that you have to go through certain movements and say certain things, and so it has to be explained that's what salah means. So don't just go based on dictionary. Or siyam just means abstention or abstaining or restraining. But it's specifically the Islamic meaning is that you abstain from food and drinks, it's within certain hours, so that has to be explained. The same thing about zakat, hajj, they are a special Islamic words, yes.
So the Arabic version like the Quran comes with the tafsir normally too?
Yes, so even an Arab, if they try to read it, they may not be able to pick up everything, they have to read the tafsir also. And also it clarifies other rhetorical aspects, socio-cultural backgrounds, and linguistic aspects that tafsir will explain, and also clarifies the fog of the language and the culture. Some words are related to culture. We'll give some more examples later if I go into it. We don't have time now, right now. And also more accuracy in terms of tafsir perspective, exegetical perspective. Also, it will diminish some of the misconceptions. Like some verses are quoted, people say, Muslims in the Quran says, go kill non-Muslims wherever you find them, right? A verse they are just quoted without reading the next verse behind it, after it or before it, without understanding the historical context. They just take that one part of the verse and quote it in media. Quran is about killing non-Muslims and all that. That's what happens. And when you translate it, you have to explain that the historical context behind it and clarify misconceptions. So having a footnote or parenthetical remarks is a translational requirement in the Quran text. And therefore, the translator must have knowledge of the science of tafsir to translate. So now the assignment that we have for this week is Surah Fatiha. Surah Fatiha, I have given you 3 different translations, one by Ansari Maududi, and one by Yusuf Ali, and one by Ayub Hamid. I want you to read very critically and compare every single verse and every single word that you see difference, and talk about it more. For example, Rahman and Rahim has been translated by one as merciful, gracious. Another one translated as compassionate, merciful. So what is the difference between compassionate and merciful? What is the difference in English language? What does it mean? What are the differences between, gracious and merciful? So talk about those kind of differences and talk about different subtleties of the English language, subtleties of the Arabic, if you know, and, talk about why this translator chose this word versus that word, and why he's saying this phrase this way or that way. And pay attention to some keywords in Surah Fatiha, how they are translated, such as Rahman, Rahim, Rab, Alameen, Na'budu, Maghdub, Dalin, and so this is a very critical word that I really want you to spend a good amount of time, all of you. And if Sunday is not possible, I can give you extension a little bit. Does anybody need extension?
Yes.
How long? How long? A few more hours? Monday morning? Okay, I'll give you until next class. How is that? Wednesday night? Okay? So Wednesday night, you must submit it. It's a lot of time, one full week. And start working on it tonight. Read very carefully, but tomorrow I'm going to send you the instructions and read the instructions clearly and compare, and very critically, you will really learn Surah Fatiha in a way that you will remember it for the rest of your life. When you read your prayer, salat, you will enjoy, inshallah, your prayer. Okay? I hope all of you will benefit tremendously from this. Any other thoughts, questions? Okay. Yes?
I had a question, but it's kind of lengthy.
Okay, you can hold it for next time, inshallah. Jazakumullahu khair. May Allah be with you. From now on, the class becomes very more interesting and exciting, because now you get into practical aspects.